Welcome to our third video in our study of the book of Daniel. In this video and the next one that follows, we're going to be studying Daniel chapter 1 verses 1 and 2. We're going to begin in this video by examining some historical questions about the dating of the events described in these two verses, and then in the video following, we'll actually study the text. Daniel 1 is the first of 6 court tales in the first half of the book, and it also serves as an introduction to the entire book, and thereby introduces Daniel and his friends and narrates how they come to be in Babylon, and it explains their circumstances. Let's see if we can actually begin by reading the text. We read in Daniel 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. So the narrative begins by describing the circumstances which lead to Daniel being exiled in Babylon. We're told that in the 3rd year of the reign of the Judean king Jehoiakim, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, besieges Jerusalem. This detail, that Nebuchadnezzar comes to Jerusalem in the 3rd year of the king of Judea, Jehoiakim, is one of the alleged historical inaccuracies which some modern scholars point to as indicating that the book of Daniel was not really written in the 6th century BC, but it was instead written in the time of the Maccabean revolt in the 2nd century BC. And these scholars suggest that the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, was 606 BC, and that Nebuchadnezzar became king of Babylon in 605 BC, and really in the 4th year of Jehoiakim. And they say, when you look at Jeremiah 25:1, it corroborates that. And if you look at Jeremiah 25:1, you'll see there it reads that the word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah, notice, in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, and then it says that was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So these scholars suggest that history records that Nebuchadnezzar became king in 605 BC and not in 606 BC. And really in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, as it's stated in Jeremiah 25, and not in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, as is stated in Daniel 1, verse 1. They also say that there's no historical record of Nebuchadnezzar besieging Jerusalem in 606 or 605 BC. And this alleged historical inaccuracy is pointed to as evidence that the writer of Daniel was not really from the 6th century BC, but from the 2nd century BC. And as such, he was not familiar with the history of the events, and he got his facts mixed up. There is, however, an easy explanation for all this. Firstly, the question of overlapping dates between Jehoiakim's and Nebuchadnezzar's reign can be explained by there being 2 different systems of counting the reigns of the king. One system used by the Judeans and a different system used by the Babylonians. So when we look at this slide, you'll see that the Babylonian system does not count the accession year of the king, the year that the king comes to the throne. So for instance, if the king came to the throne in October of 2025, they would not count 2025 as the 1st year of the king's reign. They would instead count from January 1, 2026 as the 1st full year of the king's reign. Contrast that with the Judean system, in which they in fact do count the 1st partial year of the king's reign, his accession year, as year 1. So they would count from October 2025 as the 1st year of the king's reign. When you put those together, you realize that in Daniel 1, if Daniel is in fact using the Babylonian system, year 1 is really year 2 under the Judean system. And so he gets to year 3 by not counting the accession year of the Babylonian king. Whereas in Judea, where Jeremiah would have been using the non-accession system, he would count year 4 really as Daniel's year 3. I hope I'm not confusing you and this makes sense. The basic point is that they're both, Daniel and Jeremiah, referring to the same historical event. They're just counting using a different system. And so the events in Daniel 1 took place during the accession year of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, probably when he was still co-regent with his father, and just after the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC. This is the same historical event and date that is referred to in Jeremiah 25, verse 1. While we have no historical record, if we are to address the next issue of whether there was a siege of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 605 BC, while we have no historical record of a Babylonian siege of Jerusalem in that year, 605 BC, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Likely, Nebuchadnezzar would have threatened Jerusalem after defeating the Egyptians at Carchemish. Jehoiakim had only recently been made a vassal king of the Egyptian Pharaoh Necho on his way to support the Egyptians after Necho had defeated Jehoiakim's father Josiah at Megiddo. And so having defeated the Egyptians and the Assyrians at Carchemish in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar threatens Jerusalem on his way south to deal with the Egyptians. The message would have been surrender and become a vassal of Babylon or I will attack. So we don't have an actual historical record, but when you look at the sequence of events in history, it makes sense that as Nebuchadnezzar moves south to deal with the Egyptians, that he would have stopped in Babylon to tell the Judeans, you guys are now my servants and no longer the servants of the Egyptians. The fact is that we must admit that we don't have all the details simply because we are dealing with ancient history. So it is possible that there was in fact a siege of Jerusalem in 605 BC, but the details of it are simply not recorded in any existing historical text. We do, however, have from 2 Chronicles 36, 5-7, which seems a text which seems to refer to the same event of Nebuchadnezzar's besieging Jerusalem in 605 BC when Yahweh hands Jehoiakim into his hands along with the temple vessels. And if we look at that scripture, we read that Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign. And he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. Against him came up Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and bound him in chains to take him to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also carried part of the vessels of the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his palace in Babylon. So, we're told that Nebuchadnezzar bound Jehoiakim to take him in chains to Babylon, but that he actually he did not take him to Babylon. It seems that he left him in Jerusalem. One theory is that Nebuchadnezzar bound Jehoiakim in chains to take him to Babylon, but that Jehoiakim submitted to him as his vassal and was left in Jerusalem in that status. The words laid siege in Daniel 1 could therefore refer to a very short besiegement before Jerusalem surrendered. Well, we're not entirely sure what happened, but suffice it to say that the contention that the historical accuracy of Daniel 1 is brought into question cannot really be supported. Well, having answered the historical questions about the dating of the events in Daniel 1 verses 1-2, in our next video, we will begin by studying the actual text. I hope to see you then.